So people are starting to come in. I see Catherine, Kit. Good to see you, Kit. Lee, Michael, Robin, Tracy, Wendell. Awesome, filling up the room. Justin Moses is on here. You should come by and see me, Justin. I haven't seen you in a long time. Gina, Holly, Jeff Rice, probably calling in from somewhere in Texas at the moment. All right, so looking good. People are coming in the room. Keep coming in. As you're coming in, we are recording this session, so there'll be a recording posted in a blog at the very probably end of the day, first of the day tomorrow. And then if you registered for today, which if you're in the room, you did register, you're going to get a recap. So we have someone attending that has taken notes from the day. So think about this, Mo. You don't have to take any notes. They get taken for you. So all the important things that you're going to give us today go into this nice little compact piece that gets resent out to everyone that registered, along with all the links. I know that you've got some links to upcoming events and things that you have going on that we'll include in that as well. And then we want to also include information about your books and the other resources that you have. So again, as people are coming in, we are recording this so that it can be repurposed and reused, and you'll get a copy of the recording if you'd like to rewatch it or share it with others. My friend Mo is with us today. Hey, Jeff Turner, good to see you. Jason Rush. Just watching that number continue to climb. Nice job. People are waving at us, Mo, so that's always a good
right, waving back.
So if you have questions as we go through the session today, so make sure you're using Q&A. Just go ahead and pop that up. If you ask a question to Mo, what I'll do is just say, hey, Mo, we got a question, and we can run through and get that answered. We'll probably have some time at the end too. If you want to hold until then, that's fine. But feel free to have a little bit of back and forth conversation. I know Mo wants this to be interactive. He's got some polls teed up and going to do some chat interaction. So put your phones away, jump out of email, make sure you're focused on what we're working on and what we're talking about. A little bit of information about Mo, and I bet you most people on this call know you. You're pretty well known. Founder and president of Forum Resources Network, co-founder of the Harvard Business School Alumni Forums. Prior to that, Mo served as executive director of the Entrepreneurs Organization from 1991 to 1997, where he created the peer-to-peer forum program, content initiated hundreds of CEO forums. I was not forum trained by you, Mo. I think I may be one of there's 20,000 CEOs and entrepreneurs in 33 countries over the course of nearly 3 decades. Somehow I missed that number. I'm not even sure how that happened.
How did that happen?
But I've known you for a ton of years, and I appreciate you being here. He's also the author of 2 best-selling books, Forum, The Secret Advantage of Successful Leaders, and his latest one, The Friendship Advantage, which if you don't have that book, you've got to go buy that book. It's amazing, and a lot of the content we're going to talk about today comes from that book. Our topic today is, with all eyes on bringing more humanity into the workplace, Mo's latest book, The Friendship Advantage, makes a powerful impact on your company's culture. Studies have shown how friendship at work improves employee productivity, happiness, retention, and the culture of an organization. So today, as Mo is going to be talking to us about the 7 keys to accelerate the process of building meaningful friendships in life and at work. And again, we're recording this so you can watch it after. I say that about 6 times, Mo, because about halfway through the morning, somebody's going to say, hey, is this being recorded? And I'll have to answer yes over and over. So everybody knows
I've seen that happen. Yep.
We are recording this. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mo, and let you get cranking. And if any questions come in, I'll raise my hand and jump in. So welcome, sir.
Well, thank you, Andy, and thank you, everybody, for joining. I feel extremely welcome and among friends and family, as I see some of the comments on the chat and some of the names that I've known for years and years. And Andy, I am shocked that you missed one of my trainings. You must have been absent that day because, I've been to Nashville so many times. Anyway, good to see you and good to see everybody. So I want to start with a little foundation, how I got here, my forum story, as it were, the peer group story, and then what led me to the DNA of that peer group process and how that parlayed into the book, The Friendship Advantage. And then I want to talk about just the 7 keys to building those relationships. And then after that, we're going to talk about how some of those can be used in other ways and having peer groups in your companies, both for perpetual team building and in terms of corporate diversity forums. So we've got a packed agenda, and let's get ready. So as Andy mentioned, I was executive director of the Entrepreneurs Organization from 91 to 97. And I quit because I fell in love. I fell in love with this thing we call forum, which is the peer group process for the entrepreneur members of the Entrepreneurs Organization. And one of the things that started to happen in working with those groups is often somebody would say something along the lines of, oh my God, you guys are like my best friends. Or they would say something like, I've shared something here that I've never shared with anybody else before. And initially that was something that, you know, and to some extent when I hear that, of course, it still warms my heart. But what I started to realize is for some folks coming to these forums was in some way considered a substitute for best friends or a substitute for a place to be open and honest. And what I realized is we have this really powerful mechanism. In my own group, you know, we started in 91, we still meet every single month. Actually, we meet once a week during COVID. And one of the things that, you know, we've done is we've been so close. We've been to, you know, funerals, weddings, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, you name it. And that's really how close we've come. And as a result of that, you know, in my own case, I really didn't have my father in my life for about 10 years. But one of my forum mates lost his father. And when that happened, not only did we attend the funeral, but afterwards he came to the next meeting and talked about how he wished he was closer to his father and how he wished he played ball with his dad like other kids on the block. And we had 7 men in the group at the time. The ideal size is 8 to 10. We had 7 of us and no women in that moment, but we did have some at other points of time. But still 5 of us during that meeting were in tears. And I was one of those 5, and it's because of that single meeting and because of that courage from this member of ours that I now have my father in my life today. And so what I started to see is the real power of these forums, these peer groups, and how they can truly be transformative in people's lives, whether it's personally or whether it's professionally. And so in 1997, I started Forum Resources Network, basically to provide these peer groups, these forums to everybody in the world. And that is still my mission, unwavering. And that's kind of how I got to the place where I am right now in terms of dissecting the keys that make these forums work effectively in order to leverage that technology, to leverage that benefit for building all sorts of teams and friendships and relationships. Because it worked so well in those groups, I was convinced that that is actually the fact for other relationships as well. And that is certainly proven to be true through my work. So one of the first things I want to talk about is the research. Just Gallup says that if 4 out of 10 people in your company have a friend at work, your profitability would go up by 14%. 14%. So that's a pretty big number when you think about how you get there being just simply having better relationships at work. So I'd like you to just take a moment and put in the chat box the number of people that you feel are real close friends in your workplace. So just put them in the chat box, just the number. How many people in your workplace do you feel are really close friends of yours? So 2, 0, 2, 1, 1, 1, 3, 5, 2, 6, 8, 7, 3, 5, 3, 2, 3, 1, 0, 8, 4.
Joel Patterson is very popular at work.
There you go. So that gives you a sense. For some of you, you have plenty of friends at work. And for some of you, it's as few as 0 or 1. And I see a comment here from Joel Patterson. Yes, sir, I am. And Joel, I'd love to hear how that benefits you in your next chat, since you seem loquacious and free with your words. We're ready for you. So this is just, to give you a sense of why. Often I talk to the CEOs that I work with, and when I say anything about friends at work, some of them have this reaction of, yeah, but how am I supposed to fire them if I become their friend? And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about not only being friends and not only having real relationships, but also how to have the difficult conversation. Just because you're friends with someone doesn't mean you should lie to them and tell them they're doing a great job when in fact they're not. But the second thing I say to my CEO friends who have that concern is those relationships are not just about you, right? So it's about enabling your team members to have meaningful friendships with one another. It's not just about your relationship with all of them. All right, and Joel Patterson, I'm still waiting for the benefits of all those friendships in the chat box. But anyway, let's open it up to the rest of you. I actually would like to hear in the chat, what are the benefits that you've seen in having real friendships at work? Okay, so here we go. At least 20% of our people today worked in my last company, as well as those are lifelong friends, or lifelong relationships rather. Tanya says trust. Kevin says competition. I assume that means healthy competition. Other benefits of having real friendships at work. One person says, my one friend retired. Healthy organizations, yes. I think we all work harder for those we care more about. I think that says it beautifully. If you care, you're going to work harder for those people. Loyalty is another one. Honest discussions, trust and meaningful dialogues. It's inspiring. We work better in a group because of trust. We avoid backstabbing, critical. Laughter, also critical. Trusted and challenging. It's great to be able to connect with coworkers on a personal level. You work more with them than anyone else. And support and affirmation of my work and dreams. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. One more here. Can feel more comfortable asking for favors, of course. All right, so let's talk about the 7 keys. And the first one that I want to dive into is shared purpose and values. And for this one, we have a poll. And if you'll please take a minute, we're going to launch the poll and just answer the question. Are you clear on your company's shared purpose and values? Yes or no?
High percentage, yes. Look at that.
And I can't see that percentage. Andy, can you tell me what it is?
Yeah, sure. 93% say yes. 93%.
And that is incredible. And that is heartwarming. And I love hearing that, because what's the consequence if you're not on the same page, if you don't have the same shared purpose and values? Perhaps we could hear from some of you who don't feel like you have that. Somebody from the 7%. I won't identify you. I'd like to know the consequences of not having shared purpose and values.
Yeah, it's only 2 votes out of all.
Oh, it's only 2 people. Okay.
It's only 2 people.
All right. Well, we won't put them under too much pressure. I will say, since this is a great number, I think we are speaking or preaching to the choir, as it were. And Andy, I'm sure that's a testament to the fact that all these people are Petra Coach clients.
Yeah, most of them
right?
probably have heard these messages before somewhere. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is wonderful. Let's move on then to the next key, which is judgment-free. I want to talk about this one a little bit, because this one is a slippery slope, and it's one that's near and dear to my heart. So one of the things in the forum groups that we've had the blessing of working with and being a part of is we are supposed to suspend judgment, and we do that in a variety of ways. So for example, if somebody says something that you don't like, we don't roll our eyes, we don't sigh, and we certainly don't say, you idiot, I can't believe you did that, because that would be very judgmental. But even when somebody asks for advice, which is how it slides in there, and we want to give someone advice, the key learning in the peer groups, and something that I found to be true in life as well, is not to give advice, because when we give advice, in fact, according to Harvard Business Review, if that advice is not taken, the relationship suffers. So imagine you're in a group, a team, 8 people, 10 people, and one of you says, I have a challenge, and the other 9 give that person advice on how to deal with that challenge. Perhaps the person with that problem can follow one of those options, but they can't do them all. And they certainly may not need to do them all. By definition, the advice they don't take affects the relationship negatively, according to Harvard Business Review. And this just came out a year ago, although we've been preaching this for nearly 3 decades now. The other way that advice slips in is through questions. And so a question is supposed to be pure. Can you help me understand? Can you tell me how you arrived at this decision? Can you tell me what options you've considered? As opposed to, don't you think you should do X, Y, Z? Don't you think you should fire him? And so when you load a question like that, it implies the answer is you should do what this person is saying. And that's a way that advice slips in. Now, one of the things that I've learned in my own life is, I got plenty of advice, back to my dad's story, from lots of friends and family that I should call my dad. And none of that mattered. What mattered is hearing it firsthand in a very visceral, emotional way from my forum mate. And when I heard it that way, it pierced my heart. And then I felt it. And then I decided it was right for me. But the entire time I was being given advice on how I should deal with it was not effective for me. And for those of you with children, or those of you that have spouses, and let's put this in the chat box, yes or no, does it work when you tell them what to do? I see Andy shaking his head. No, I'm reading him verbatim here. No, never, no, never, very seldom, usually no, 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 rarely. So those are your comments. Oh, one person said, hell yes. That sounds like it's coming from Nashville, because I've been there. I love the way they speak. Another one said, I get the exact opposite of what I want. Another one said they dig their heels in. And so here's what's funny, you guys. Why do we keep giving advice anyway? You already know it doesn't work, and you've just told me that in the chat box. Not that it's news to me, but I wanted to share that with all of you on this call because it makes it relevant to all of you. So why do we continue to give advice? Why do you think we give advice? Please put it in the chat box. And here I get silence. Oh, we desire to help. Yes. Earning trust is harder. We want to help. It makes us feel useful. We know what's best. Giving suggestions to help someone. It's easy. Trying to relate. We feel obligated. Been there, done that. So they could learn from my mistakes and not make their own. And so the only thing I would say to that comment is just share your story.
Right.
Instead of saying, here's what I think you should do, which puts me on a pedestal of sorts, just share your story. Here's what I did. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't work. Here's where I failed. Here's where I succeeded. And by doing that, you enable the recipient to make their own decisions. And that is empowering, and that's really important. What are the implications with your team of enabling them to make their own decisions versus telling them what to do? Can you please type that in the chat box? What are the implications of letting your teammates find their own answer? More confidence in their skills, ownership over decision, ownership of the outcome. It's more effective. Ownership in the decision. They will own the situation. They feel empowered and ownership. People learn more by what they say or do than what someone is telling them to do. They do make their own mistakes and learn better. Ownership of decision. So very enlightened group you got here, Andy. I'm super impressed by what they're saying. And this is good stuff. So hopefully by now, we all understand what we mean by judgment-free, and we will stop or minimize giving those judgments. One more comment here. Gain confidence in their actions. Good stuff. All right, so now we are going to move on to the next key, which is vulnerability. Actually, I'm sorry, I think I missed one. So
reliability, right?
Reliability, absolutely. Thank you very much. And so reliability means a lot of things to a lot of different people. In the forum groups, what we did for reliability is we had very strict rules as it relates to attendance, as it relates to punctuality. If you were late, you would buy dinner. I don't know about your forum, Andy, but if you're late, you buy dinner, and it was often at the nicest restaurant in town, and you could be in for, you know, $1,000 bucks. And not that that was motivating for everybody, but it made it clear what we expect of one another. And without having that clarity of expectation, we would let each other down. So I'm wondering if you guys can share some of how you expect reliability. What does reliability mean to you in terms of what you expect from your teammates? Please put that in the chat box.
Respect people's time.
Respect people's time. The golden rule, do what you say. Being prepared. If you say you're going to do it, do it. Follow through with commitments, being available. Do what you agreed to. If they say they will do it, it will be done. Do what you say and agree to it. Listen with intent. All the above, also consistency, expectations. I think that's about clarity of expectations. Beautiful. So now a quick yes or no. Do you feel that you work with a reliable group of folks who have a common understanding of what reliability means for each of you?
So this is yes or no?
Yes or no. So yes, mostly. No, no. Yes, yes, yes. Depends on who. Yes. Yes, yes. Getting there. Yes. Depends on the person. Sometimes. Okay. So that gives you a flavor. I think this one is a little bit more all over the map. And I think it makes a very important point of being clear on what reliability means to you, what it means to your coworkers, what it means to those people for whom you said no, what it means for those people that you said sometimes. And that way, hopefully we could move the reliability up a notch on the scale. So moving on, next one is mischievous fun. And this is probably, you know, one of my favorites. So one of the things I saw in my work with these forum groups is, you know, some groups have the capacity to get really deep and really meaningful, which we're going to dig into in a bit. And some of them have the capacity to have real fun together, and they don't hold back. It feels like a group of friends that have been friends for 20 years. And the groups that do both, I saw very clearly were the groups that were most bonded, that were closest, because in my view, the way I call it is they have an end-to-end relationship. They actually know each other on the full spectrum of who they are, from their lowest to their highest and everything in between. And so that's how I define mischievous fun, is what you do with your friends, your best friends, when you're not worried about judgment. And so, you know, here's a silly little example. So we live in this old town, Alexandria, Virginia. And my kid, who's now 12, a couple of years ago, him and his friends, we would go out and we would have these ghost tours in town. People would come around and they would do these ghost tours. And we would go scare the ghost tours because it's a ghost tour. We figured we have to do our part. And that's an example of mischievous fun. Do you think that bonded us as a group of people? Yes. Do you think those kids had fun and laughed and ran around like crazy? Of course. And most importantly, Did they say Mo's the coolest dad on the block? I think so. So mischievous fun, just not to be underrated. I think it's important. One of the things that I do in team building sessions, even if it's on Zoom, is just asking people to share stories of mischievous fun. And so I'd like to invite you to do so in chat. I don't think we have time to read them all, but I'll see if we could read a couple of them just for the levity of the group. Examples of mischievous fun, ideally at work, but I'm not going to limit you. So please put them in the chat.
Mo, we had a group come in. This has probably been a month ago, and came into one of our Zoom huddles. So we had our entire business, everybody in our company was there, and they broke us into groups of 3 or 4, and they gave us a script. It was kind of a made-up script. Ours happened to be Wizard of Oz, but it was 2 pages of script, and we had 18 minutes to figure out how to reenact this script, and we were going to be judged by the rest of the group. So there were props that you got from your home. There were different parts that you played. And in the very beginning, it was like, oh man, this is kind of odd and weird. And then once you got into it, it became hilarious, And I had to step out of the meeting for another meeting, but I watched the videos of the replay at the end of this thing, and it was hilarious. Everybody.
Oh, I love it, love it, love it. So I've got a couple of comments I want to make sure to read to you. This one, we hid our coworker's phone above the ceiling tile, then called it incessantly. They couldn't ever find it. Another one, sadly, I work with scolds and cry bullies. Fun at work just doesn't happen. Another one, we've stuffed animal a ram we named Rambo. Rambo will get kidnapped and held hostage. We send pictures of where Rambo is, and everyone has to guess who has Rambo and attempt to save him. Good stuff. Here's another one. Currently, photoshopping a manager's head on characters from The Office. And make sure you don't get fired because of some of this mischievous stuff, you guys. Here's another one. Tinfoiled someone's entire office while they were on vacation. Beautiful, beautiful. Good stuff. I like to see some of you having fun out there. All right, moving on. So the next one is vulnerability. And okay, vulnerability is, sorry, I see one more comment here. I want to make sure to read it to you. Not known for my fun side. What are some ideas to introduce that into the workplace?
Like,
so,
read above.
Read above.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Read above. But the other thing I want to just highlight again is having that conversation with your team, having that conversation about what mischievous fun things have done outside of work can begin to get people thinking about it inside of work. And so that's been my experience with that. So vulnerability, I want to start with David Bradford. I want to quote him. He is a professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. And he, in his words, vulnerability is the currency of relationships. Without vulnerability, relationships remain superficial. My words, think of any relationship in your life. And if you're not as close as you would like, then one or both of you is simply not being vulnerable. And that is really all you need to think about, to say, oh my God, here's the problem. It's this person. And we have no vulnerability. And of course, we're not as close as we could be. The thing about vulnerability that's challenging, though, is there's a chicken and an egg thing, right? So what comes first? And because you are on this webinar, you now know that you have to go first, right? Because you can't just keep waiting for somebody else to do it. And if they never do it, then you're just going to keep waiting. Of course, we have to define vulnerability a little bit further. Vulnerability is taking a risk. It is stepping outside of your comfort zone. It is sharing something that you prefer not to share. And so if you're sharing something that you've shared 1,000 times, you're probably not as vulnerable about it. And vulnerability is risky. In fact, the risk is so great that it can get you in trouble in some way, shape, or form. Or it can embarrass you, or leave you feeling ashamed, or leave you feeling alone. Because one of the things that happens is if one person is vulnerable and the other is not, then the first person feels exposed. If both people, or if it's a group, a team, if everybody's vulnerable, then everybody feels supported and everybody feels like they're in it together. So vulnerability requires a few things. It requires the safety, and the safety is agreeing on confidentiality to make sure we know exactly who we could share it with or who we cannot share it with. It also requires making sure that it's a non-judgmental environment, as we've discussed earlier. And knowing that I could count on you. So that's part of the reliability. Are you going to be there for me? Or am I just being vulnerable, in vain? So this kind of process of having the safety container built is the first step. The second step is, as a leader, to pose questions that will cause people to share something vulnerable. An example, recently I was working with a few groups in the forum space who are focused on diversity issues, and I'm going to come back to that towards the end of the meeting here. And it was really in the height of, and we're still in the height of everything happening in this country around racial equality. And my communication starter was really simple, is given everything that's happening in the country right now, with all the social unrest, what emotions are you feeling about what's happening? And so by asking what emotions people are feeling, we get the deeper feelings that people are having, and we get people speaking about their own engagement with the issue versus just their opinions about what's happening. So this is not debate, this is not political pontification, this is simply asking people to share their hearts. And so whatever questions you pose, and there are millions of them to help get to know your team members better, the one thing that I always insist on is, and what are your emotions about that? Because the emotions tell us the full story. If I tell you, I did tell you that I didn't talk to my father for 10 years, I'm not sure I told you my emotions during that 10 years. And if I told you I felt guilty, that's a very different story than if I told you I feel neglected. And so I would argue that emotions communicate at least 50% of the story in very, very concise form. And so it's part of emotional intelligence, it's part of emotional awareness. And by stopping to ask yourself or to ask your teammates what emotions they have, it creates a deeper awareness for everybody and a deeper connection for everybody. And I see a couple of funny comments. I see yes with lots of S's and exclamation points. Thank you, Britt. And so let's move on unless there are any questions. Okay. So the next key is kind truth. And kind truth I define as the ability to have the difficult conversation without ripping someone's head off. And that's my pedestrian language for it. But it's the ability to have difficult conversations kindly and respectfully. So I like to think about this conversation in a little bit more depth by saying, in the work that I've done, I've seen primarily two kinds of people as it relates to difficult conversations. Those who are conflict avoiders and prefer to stick their head in the sand, and that's my background, I own it. And those who are bulls in the china shop, who really don't care how it comes across, as long as they say it. And the process of doing that leaves unintended consequences. It leaves carnage, it leaves damaged relationships, it leaves people feeling like they're not important and that they were just trampled upon by someone. And chances are, when somebody's a bull in the china shop with me, I stop listening, I tune out. And it's a defense mechanism that I've seen with a lot of people. On the flip side, putting your head in the sand and saying nothing is like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die if something bothers you. And so I didn't make that up. I think it was Dalai Lama or somebody brilliant like that. But drinking poison and hoping the other person will die, I think that's insanity, right? So kind truth, and in this chapter, really we talk about first building the safe environment. What does it take to be able to have this conversation so that it's respectful, so that it's productive? And I do that by asking, what are the responsibilities of the sender? So if I'm upset with Andy because he's late, then I have a responsibility to communicate something to him about how I'm feeling. And what are the responsibilities of the receiver? So if he's receiving the message, then what is he supposed to do? So let's talk about that actually in the chat. What are the responsibilities of the sender? What do you guys think is important for me as a sender in communicating to Andy that I'm unhappy that he was late? What are my responsibilities to make sure the conversation is respectful and effective? Find solutions. What else? To be real honest, not beat around the bush, respectful, clear expectations. I see some mischievous fun, Andy, because some people are saying things about he's an alpha male, so you have to arm wrestle him first. All right. I see the mischievous fun is creeping into our kind truth. And I like it. Gain understanding, judgment-free, tell him the truth and the consequences of his tardiness, clear, concise, provide expectations. So another one is concise. So one of the ways that somebody can feel beat up is if the other person just keeps rambling. Tone of voice, very important. What else? Body language, of course. What about compassion? Compassion, very important. One of the things that's important about kind truth, just as a fundamental understanding, is I engage in this kind of a conversation with people that I care about. And if I'm going to go through the effort of having a conversation that something isn't working for me with Andy, then I'm doing it because I care about Andy and because I care about my relationship with Andy. I'm not doing it as a way of reprimanding him. And that's an important distinction. Another one says compassion. Tell him you miss him not being here on time, which I would. Address the behavior as unacceptable, not the person. And so this is not an opportunity to say, hey, you are an fill in the blank, right? This is when you did this, here's how it impacted me. Be truthful and ask if everything's okay. There could be a reason. Beautiful. Let's talk about the receiver. What are the responsibilities of the receiver? So I've just, okay, not get defensive, absolutely, positively, to own it. To own it if it's true, I would say. There could be a gross misunderstanding on my part. Active listening and take ownership. So active listening is, did I hear you right? Be vulnerable, own a misgiving, love it. Listen and take responsibility. Trust the intent of the messenger, beautiful. Listen, be open-minded, be humble. We all make mistakes. Take into account this is coming from a place of good. Absolutely. Own it. Offer opinion to fix it. One of the things as a head in the sand by nature kind of person is I might be uncomfortable with conflict in general, right? More so than those that are bulls in the china shop. And one of the tricks I've played for myself to help me better receive when somebody has something to say to me is I look for the gift, right? So if I do something today that bothers Andy or any of you, and you tell me about it, then I have the awareness that this behavior of mine can upset certain people in a certain way. And without that awareness, I may never change that behavior. With that awareness, I've been given the gift by you and the opportunity to change it. And so to think that I'm not going to tell Andy that he did something that bothered me because I don't want to hurt his feelings is maybe missing the point here, because it's still bothering me. I'm the one drinking poison and it's still affecting him. He's the one that isn't getting the benefit of the knowledge of how he impacted me. So that's a very important disposition that I've used to be a better receiver. when something is said to me. A couple more comments. Don't take advantage of the other. Own it. Offer opinion to fix it. We read that already. So that's kind truth. Any questions on that one? All right, so we'll move on. The last of the keys that I want to talk about is sharing and generosity. And this is one of those things that I think is really important. It's important because I'll quote my friend Maria Sipka from EO. She's in San Francisco, but was in Australia for all her life until a few years ago. And she says, people either come from Givington or Takington. And when I heard that, it just hit me between the eyes, again, as one of those brilliant statements that just kind of sums it all up. And so what happens when you are in a relationship with somebody who's from Takington and you are from Givington? Please put it in the chat box. Don't take advantage of other. Taking advantage. Hurt. You want to leave Givington and move to Takington? Change the person. Selfish. Givington ends up pouring from an empty cup. Strain on a relationship. You feel used by the Takingtons. Bridges burned. So those are all wonderful, and I think you guys get this. I would just simply say sharing and generosity is not just about money. It's not just about money. Please put in the chat other ways you can be sharing and generous. With your time, attention and care, kindness, acts of kindness, support, loving, time, being available, time, fully listening, a simple compliment, time, listening, thoughtfulness, time and talents, flexibility, support and time, care, no devices, mentoring. So there's many ways to give to one another. What's the impact if everybody on your team is a giver? If everybody on your team is from Givington, instead of having some that are from Takington, what's the impact on the team? Please put it in the chat box.
Mo, I feel like that's a trick question.
Why is that?
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what we get.
Genuine listening values relationships, more team trust, swing stronger. Somebody said, is it possible? Maybe that's what you're getting at, Andy. Being stronger, too much generosity and not getting their own goals done. A nurturing environment is created, less energy in accounting for good deeds. Need both. There's time to give and time to take. Beautiful. High moral, strong team atmosphere, strong performance. I'm not sure if that's possible. Yeah. So we see the various sides of the issue. I think what I want to leave you with on this point is awareness. Is there somebody who's always a taker? And can you have the courage to have the kind truth to tell the person how that impacts you? That's how I leave you with that one, because I think it's an important one. So I want to move on to the power of peer groups. And okay, here we go. So the power of peer groups in your company. I want to start with just a little bit of an explanation of how these peer groups work, and then talk about some examples of companies that have peer group programs inside their companies. And there are two benefits that I'll just tell you off the bat. One of them is what I call perpetual team building. And the other one is the corporate diversity forums, which is something really exciting and new that I'm working on. So, you know, as a reminder, a peer group is a group of peers who don't have a conflict of interest, who meet in a structured, confidential environment on a regular basis, ideally monthly, for 2 to 4 hours, depending on whether you're doing it by Zoom or whether you're doing it in person. the peer groups that Andy and I know very well, some of them have been together for 10, 20, 30 years, maybe even longer in other organizations outside of EO. In YPO, I know some have been together for 40 years. So it's quite a powerful mechanism to have this personal board of directors of people who have your back, who know you intimately, with whom you can grow and learn about yourself, about your leadership style, about any business challenge you might face, about any personal challenge you might face. And so what a lot of companies, and I say a lot, what many companies are starting to do is create these peer groups inside the company. Because by having peer groups inside the company, a few things happen. One, everything we've talked about in terms of the 7 keys to building relationships is a healthy component of a healthy culture. And so by having peer groups that follow these principles, already your culture gets a notch up because people are practicing these principles all the time. The second thing that happens is now that you have all these groups that are meeting monthly, you have perpetual team building. So it's not an event that you have once a year at your offsite or once a quarter if you're a company that's really on top of it. It's happening all the time because you have these groups that are meeting every single month on their own. And so that's just an incredible benefit that doesn't cost much. So to get them started, we're going to talk about next slide. To get them started really is a one-day training usually, and from there, they're often self-managed on a month-to-month basis. The second thing that I have here is corporate diversity forums. And I want to just tell you a little story that is changing my life kind of as we speak. So in February, a little company by the name of Google, some of you might have heard of it, came along and said, we would like to create forums inside of our company. And we started on February 6th, so we obviously worked on it a few months beforehand, on February 6th in California with 7 groups that had an all-day meeting to learn this process, to build trust, to get to know each other. And then since then, we have had a monthly meeting, 2 hours with every one of those groups. And the groups that we started with Google were started as part of their diversity, equity, and inclusivity program. And the intent was to help mid-level managers in one of their divisions to rise in the organization by having peer group support and learning from one another, breaking the silos, and helping these people grow in this organization. And so in the 7 groups, we have about 65 members. And those are all people of color as defined by Google. Some of them are Black, some are Hispanic, and essentially that's really it. So I mentioned earlier the whole question about how people are feeling and what their emotions are at this time in this country with all this stuff going on with race relationships and so forth. And what really hit home with me, which has just been personally profound and an epiphany for me, is, when I came to this country from Egypt in 1978, some of you were not born then, I really wasn't aware of this whole issue of race. I just wasn't. We never had to deal with it in Egypt when I was 11 years old. But, in fact, I was in class in 7th grade, and I was sitting between 2 girls. One was Black and one was white. And the Black girl asked me if I was Black. And I looked at her and I said, I don't know. And she said, well, where are you from? I said, I'm from Egypt. She says, well, that's in Africa. I said, well, yeah. She says, well, then you're Black. I said, okay. And then the white girl looked at me and said, and looked at her and said, he's not Black, look at this. And so, and by the way, I'm way tanner than usual right now. So you might be thrown off yourself because I'm out on the water paddleboarding every day. But anyway, I went home and I said, Mom, what's going on here? What are they talking about? And she just said, well, in my country, we don't have racial segregation. And so on I went, and I really just largely ignored the issue because I just didn't think it was an issue. And as my life went, working for the Entrepreneurs Organization and tons of entrepreneurs and CEOs, whether it's, EO or YPO or Harvard Business School alumni. What happened, and I didn't have this awareness until just a couple of months ago. What happened is I think I got further and further into white privileged bubbles, and I was completely unaware of it. And I don't have any misgivings or any judgment about that. I'm just telling you that, when I look back in my career and over 20,000 CEOs, the large majority are not minorities. They're not people of color. And so I ended up in this crazy bubble of a world of just wonderful go-getters who have the best intentions and the best companies and, just good stuff. But I did not have enough people of diversity in that way in my life. And so then, because of this work with Google, I asked them the question, what are your emotions about what's going on right now in the world? And when I heard their emotions, when I heard their real fears, when I heard just some really, really difficult stuff, I heard it in a different way. And what I realized, and my epiphany is, you watch something on the news, like let's say there's a robbery in Beijing, and you're aware, but you're not affected. But if your next door neighbor is robbed, or if your mother or your sister is robbed, you're not just aware, you are aware and affected. And that's exactly what happened to me in these forums, is that I now started to hear it from people that I care about, from people that I've learned to really know and love and care about. And it hit me emotionally for the first time. And I've said to many of them, I'm ashamed to realize that I was just, my head was in the sand on this issue, and I was just not tuned into it. And I was simply aware, but I was not affected or impacted. And so the idea behind the Corporate Diversity Forum, thank you, Google, is a forum where members of the group are diverse. And whatever the diversity is in your company, however you could structure it so that you have representations of different facets of our culture, of race, of color, of orientation, of sex, all that stuff. Whatever you can do to have that diversity be as diverse as possible will allow those people to get to know each other at a meaningful level, to care about each other and actually hear the stories with empathy of what might have happened to my mother or my next door neighbor, as opposed to what I'm watching on the news that might as well be in China. So I just want to leave you with that seed, because that is really, I think, an important step for us as people, as we think about which ways to bridge this gap of this racial divide. And I think it's an important step. I want to talk about how to build those corporate peer forums in your companies. And there's three pieces to it. First one is member selection. And see, the key thing here is not to have people that are competitive, not to have people that are reporting to one another. And basically anything that would prevent somebody from being completely open and honest in terms of the membership of that group is what you want to avoid. If your company is too small and you can't do that, I get it. But if you have a company of any significance, I would say even 50 people or more, 40 people or more, I think it's possible to create these groups without having that conflict of interest. And so that's the key thing here. The other part of the selection, obviously, is to create the diversity in the membership of those groups. I think that's an important piece to make sure that you get the double whammy, not just of creating better leaders and people who are excelling by helping each other out, but also creating the empathy across cultures by having people of different backgrounds in those groups. I mentioned in initial training, and basically, I'm going to tell you that 1, agree on confidentiality. 2, agree on non-judgment and not giving advice. 3, share with each other stories about your backgrounds, your backstories, so people get to know each other. and build a trusting relationship. And you, as the leader, if you're going to do that first, lead by example. Back to the vulnerability and the chicken and the egg. You go first, then people will, reciprocate in kind. And before you know it, you'll have a magical experience. And then the monthly meetings, basically, we do two things. We do updates. Here's what's happened in my life, personally and professionally, since I've seen you, the good, the bad, the ugly. 3 minutes apiece. And then one person shares the challenge with which they would like help, and everybody shares their experiences. So that's the simplification. But if you want more information on that, then we have this book, and that's my first book, Forum, The Secret Advantage of Successful Leaders. And it gives you a blueprint for how to do exactly everything that I've shared with you in creating those peer groups in your companies. So with that, I would like to thank all of you. I think we have maybe up to 5 minutes for any questions that might come up.
We might take a little bit of extra time. So I'm going to do this a little bit differently. If you want to ask a question, you're more than, I've got one in the Q&A box. You're more than welcome to put it in the Q&A. I'd really like to hear from people. So if you want to raise your hand, I'll click the allow to speak or whatever, and you can actually just ask your question. If you have something for Mo, raise your hand. There is a question. It says, we have what I would consider a highly functional team, approximately 25 people, clear sense of shared purpose, fun, mischief, and some vulnerability. But there's also a few people in the group who have known each other for decades, went to high school together, worked together at other companies. Any thoughts on the positive and or negative impact of this? I sometimes feel a bit on the outside, but I also think their friendships contribute to the strength of the team.
Yeah.
So the question is around like positive or negative, people that kind of bring relationships to an organization.
Yeah. So in the case of a forum, when there's a perception of a clique between a couple of people, what it creates for the rest is a feeling of exclusion. And in the case of a forum, we talk about how that is not ideal, and really everybody in the group should be at par, equal in terms of how they see one another and how they interact with one another. And there sometimes are exceptions, like if Andy and I are neighbors, yeah, of course we're going to see each other more. But we don't want to have anybody feeling excluded. What I hear in that question is exactly that. I hear that some people might feel excluded. And I think there's kind of two ways to combat it. One is, if you are going to do any kind of a peer group program, is to split those people up for their own benefit as well. So sometimes people that have known each other for 30 years have already a certain set of limitations on how far they're willing to go to get to know each other because of the social structure around them. And so it might even help them if they're not in the same group, and that's an important piece. But the second thing that comes to mind is going back to our Kind Truth chapter, and that is to say, hey, I'm feeling excluded. I just want to share that with you. And just sharing it makes you less likely to feel that way. A, because it's off your chest, and B, because you now have a common awareness, and they may in fact start to behave differently. And you might start to behave differently as a result of owning it.
So we have I've been in a forum, I've been in 3 forums, and this one I'm in now is probably 10 years, something like that. And we recently brought a new member into the forum. We were on a retreat, so we were away for a few days. And we sat down the first evening. I knew the person, some other people kind of knew the person, but what kind of brought him into the group really, really quickly was he just got incredibly vulnerable with his kind of story and where he came from. And that put him on a playing field with the rest of us that had had a decade to learn all of that in about an hour and a half. So, I think the more you can just kind of jump in there and share and be open and be vulnerable, I think that vulnerability is, as you said, currency. So I think that's the way to spend that really quickly with that group. They grew up with each other. They went to high school together. They know all the stuff. They got to, they have background. Catch up to their background as quickly as possible.
Well said, Andy. Beautiful. You've done this before.
A couple times. Any other questions? You want to raise your hand? Shout out for Mo. Anything at all? All right, I'm going to be looking for that. So Mo, you used the chat more than anybody that we've ever hosted on a webinar. So congratulations, you get the award for that. I'm going to ask the group to use it one more time. So let's show Mo some appreciation if you would. So yeah, there you go. Keep putting them in. So use the chat to show Mo some appreciation. And on our side, what we're going to do, we adopted this group called Tiny Superheroes. Can you see this? It's a little superhero cape.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I met this EOer from St. Louis, gosh, in February. I think I was there doing a talk, and she's sitting on the front row. There's about 50 entrepreneurs in the room, and she was sitting on the front row, and she had a tag on her shirt that said Tiny Superheroes. And about halfway through my presentation, I said, hey, what the hell is Tiny Superheroes? And she said, well, our mission is to change the way the world views kids with disabilities. And she does that through the creation of these capes and sending these capes to kids that are dealing with disabilities and illness. And I was like, you have the most important business in this room. What can we do to help you? So since that moment, we have said, we are going to purchase and send as many capes as possible. We actually committed to 2,500 that day in that room. So for you being here, Mo, and my appreciation for that is we're going to send some capes to some kids in your name. So just know that that's going to happen. And if anybody else would like to do that, in the recap, there'll be a little blurb about Tiny Superheroes. I think especially during this time when so much is going on, we don't want to forget those little guys running around fighting good fights. So really appreciate you being here today. You got lots of great comments. Some people saying, hey, good to see you again.
Thank you.
CEO Roundtable Minnesota. So there's lots of connections there. I've got some follow-up for you. I made some notes on some things that you and I should start doing together. So I will follow up with you on that. Have a great day, my friend. Everybody on the call, thank you for being here. There'll be a recap in your inbox, end of the day, first of the day tomorrow, and up on the blog with a recording of this for you to share with anybody that you'd like to. Mo, thanks
Thank
for being
you.
here,
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody. Pleasure.
Right. See you
Thank
later.
you so much.
Bye.